the night after the testing tune, we tore the trans apart we tore the trans out to adjust the clutch. We noticed the shaft was twisted in the transmission, so we pulled the transmission completely apart. And the overdrive housing, there's a clutch pack in there. This transmission ran all off of air, so once the air pushes on that piston to apply the clutches, there's your overdrive. Well, that was welded solid, so like all the clutches and everything was stuck solid. So now every gear was in overdrive. So we had first through third. Launched and it would shift and fall right on its face. So it threw our speed sensor off. So first gear now went to, as before it went to like, I don't know, 60 miles an hour. Now it's going 80 miles an hour. So that's throwing everything off. And then we burned up second gear. So then we had first gear and overdrive. After the drag races, we pulled the trans out again, adjusted the clutch, patched the transmission up as best we could for the dyno day. I knew it had overdrive, and that's pretty much all I need to dyno, so we got it up on the dyno and was rolling through the gears, and it turned the nitrous on, and we noticed we had a stuck solenoid. So at that point, all hell broke loose. I didn't know which solenoid it was. We have a couple stages on the truck. Basically, we ripped the front end of the truck off on the dyno. We didn't have nothing to block off the solenoid that was leaking, so I threw the smallest jet in I could, and we had to turn the bottles on once the engine was up into the overdrive, because other than that, we turned the bottle on, it would just snuff the engine out. So that was a challenge in itself. I wasn't expecting those numbers. I don't know what the dyno calculations were. I don't know if we were spinning on the dyno or whatever, but I've done higher numbers on less power, less engine, and no nitrous. So I think the dyno day at UCC was a bit of a struggle for everybody. There was a lot of good trucks on there that should have put up a lot higher numbers, but we're all up against, the same struggles. And that morning, when we got there, I swapped the tires on, and something was locking up in the transmission, so we jacked it up and got it to free up. And while it was on the jack stands, the tires were still rolling, and they shouldn't have been rolling. And I bumped the reverser on it, so we instantly blew up reverse gear. So at that point, I thought everything was over. This trans has had enough. It's been beat. Can't do anything because it's a transmission. There's nobody out there had the same type of transmission, so I couldn't go to anybody and say, hey, I need this, or this. This transmission is built here in Utah, so parts availability was slim. I had brought what I thought I would need, but that wasn't enough. I had clutches and shafts, and I had backup the main clutch, but ultimately, once that overdrive, the overdrive was welded up, I couldn't even tear it apart because I didn't have the tools or the parts to fix it, so I just left it welded. And so we hooked up, you know, we didn't have reverse and everything, so we made it down to the sled pull track, got teched in and everything, got hooked to the sled, and they tried to drag me back and it was locking up again. So we finally got it to free up and they drug me back to the starting line, and I knew at that point, I said, well, it's either gonna work or it's not gonna work. So started lighting it up and feathering out the clutch, and she was going, and then right when I dropped the hammer on the clutch, it said no more. It didn't want nothing to do with it. So at that point, they pulled me off the track. Went to, I pulled the trans out real quick. Pretty much felt like a coffee can full of rocks, and I said, yeah, we can't fix this, so might as well shine her up and take some photos and make it look good and sit back and watch sled pulls and get some rest. We'd been thrashing on the truck for weeks on end and hours on hours and had minimal sleep. We're clear across the country from home. We're out here with the best of the best, and it wasn't for a lack of effort. That's all I can say.
At least we had a good looking booth. Don't put that in there.
It's good.